"Now that," she grinned, "is what I call healthy thinking." For a while he did stand around the central plaza along with thousands of other idlers, watching the robot dump trucks assemble the piles of discarded equipment. The crowd cheered loudly as an enormous crane was knocked over on its side. "There's 50 millions worth out there," a bystander exulted. "It's going to be the biggest preliminary I've ever seen." "It certainly will be," he said, catching a little of the other man's enthusiasm despite his previous doubts. Preliminary rites were part of the emotion-stoking that preceded the highest holy day. Each rite was greater and more destructive than those that had gone before. As tokens of happy loyalty, viewers threw hats and watches and stickpins onto the pile just prior to the entry of the slaggers. What better way could be found for each man to manifest his common humanity? After a while, doubt started assailing him again, and Hart found himself returning almost against his will to the library building. Burnett greeted him cordially. "Today's visit is completely legal," he said. "Anyone doing olden time research is automatically authorized if he has been here before." "I hope my thought can be as legal," Hart blurted out. "Well, that was just a joke." "Oh, I can recognize a joke when I hear one, my friend." Hart went to his booth, feeling the man's eyes measuring him more intently than ever. It was almost a welcome relief to start reading the reference scanner once more. But not for long. As the wider pattern unfolded, his anxiety state intensified. It was becoming perfectly obvious that many replacements used to be made long before they were needed. And it was still true. "I should not be thinking such thoughts," he told himself. "I should be outside in the plaza, being normal and human." But he could see how it had come about, step by step. First, there had been pressure from the ruling echelons, many of whose members only maintained their status through excessive production. Then, much more important, there had been the willful blindness of the masses who wanted to keep their cozy, familiar treadmills going. He slammed down the off button and went out to the librarian's desk. "Do people want to work all the time?" he said. "For the sake of work alone?" He immediately regretted the question. But Burnett did not seem to mind. "You've only stated the positive reason, Mr. Hart. The negative one could be stronger. The fear of what they would have to do if they did not have to work much over a long period." "What would it mean?" "Why, they would have to start thinking. Most people don't mind thought if it's concentrated in a narrow range. But if they have to think in a broad range to keep boredom away, no, that's too high a price for most of them. They avoid it when they can, and under present circumstances, they can." He stopped. "Of course, that's a purely hypothetical fiction I'm constructing." Hart shook his head. "It sounds awfully real to be purely—" He, too, caught himself up. "Of course, you're only positing a fiction." Burnett started putting his desk papers away. "I'm leaving now. The preliminary begins soon. Want to come?" The man's face was stolidly blank except for his brown eyes, which burned like a zealot's. Fascinated by them, Hart agreed. It would be best to return anyway. Some of the bystanders had looked too curiously at him when he had left. Who would willingly leave a rite when it was approaching its climax? Chapter 2. The plaza was now thronged, and the sacrificial pile towered over 100 feet in the cleared center area. Then, as the first collective "Ah" arose, a giant slagger lumbered in from the east, the direction prescribed for such commencements. Long polarity arms glided smoothly out of the central mechanism and reached the length for total destruction. "That's the automatic setting," parents explained to their children. "When?" the children demanded eagerly. "Any moment now." Then the unforeseen occurred. There was a rumbling from inside the pile, and a huge, jagged patchwork of metal shot out, smashing both arms. The slagger teetered, swaying more and more violently from side to side until it collapsed on its side. The rumbling grew, and then the pile, like a mechanical cancer, ripped the slagger apart and then absorbed it. The panicking crowd fell back. Somewhere a child began crying, provoking more hubbub. "Sabotage!" people were crying. "Let's get away!" Nothing like this had ever happened before, but Hart knew instantly what had caused it. Some high-level servo mechanisms had not been thoroughly disconnected. They had repaired their damages, then imposed their patterns on the material at hand. A second slagger came rushing into the square. It discharged immediately, and the pile finally collapsed and disintegrated as it was supposed to. The crowd was too shocked to feel the triumph it had come for, but Hart could not share their horror. Burnett eyed him. "Better look indignant," he said. "They'll be out for blood. Somebody must have sabotaged the setup." "Catch the culprits!" he shouted, joining the crowd around him. "Stop antisocial acts!" "Stop antisocial acts!" roared Burnett, and in a whisper, "Hart, let's get out of here." As they pushed their way through the milling crowd, a loudspeaker boomed out. "Return home in peace. The instincts of the people are good. Healthy destruction forever. The criminals will be tracked down, if they exist." "A terrible thing, friend," a woman said to them. "Terrible, friend," Burnett agreed. "Smash the antisocial elements without mercy." 3 children were clustered together, crying. "I wanted to set the right example for them," said the father to anyone who would listen. "They'll never get over this." Hart tried to console them. "Next week is High Holy Day," he said, but the bawling only increased. The 2 men finally reached a side avenue where the crowd was thinner. "Come with me," Burnett ordered. "I want you to meet some people." He sounded as if he were instituting military discipline, but Hart, still dazed, willingly followed. "It wasn't such a terrible thing," he said, listening to the distant uproar. "Why don't they shut up?" "They will, eventually." Burnett marched straight ahead and looked fixedly in the same direction. "The thing could have gobbled up the city if there hadn't been a second slagger," said a lone passer-by. "Nonsense," Burnett muttered under his breath. "You know that, Hart. Any self-regulating mechanism reaches a check limit sooner than that." "It has to." They turned into a large building and went up to the 50th floor. "My apartment," said Burnett as he opened the door. There were about 15 people in the large living room. They rose, smiling, to greet their host. "Let's save these self-congratulations for later," snapped Burnett. "These were merely our own preliminaries. We're not out of the woods yet. This, ladies and gentlemen, is our newest recruit. He has seen the light. I have fed him basic data, and I'm sure we're not making a mistake with him." Hart was about to demand what was going on when a short man with eyes as intense as Burnett's proposed a toast to "the fiasco in the plaza." Everyone joined in, and he did not have to ask. "Burnett, I don't quite understand why I am here, but aren't you taking a chance with me?" "Not at all. I've followed your reactions since your first visit to the library. Others here have also, when you were completely unaware of being observed. The gradual shift in viewpoint is familiar to us. We've all been through it. The really important point is that you no longer like the kind of world into which you were born." "That's true, but no one can change that." "We are changing it," said a thin-faced young woman. "I work in a servo lab and—" "Miss Wright, time enough for that later," interrupted Burnett. "What we must know now, Mr. Hart, is how much you're willing to do for your newfound convictions. It will be more work than you've ever dreamed possible." He felt as exhilarated as he did in the months after High Holy Day. "I'm down to under 10 hours labor a week. I'd do anything for your group if I could get more work." Burnett gave him a hearty handshake of congratulation, but was frowning as he did so. "You're doing the right thing for the wrong reason. Every member of this group could tell you why. Miss Wright, since you feel like talking, explain the matter." "Certainly, Mr. Hart. We are engaged in an activity of so-called subversion for a positive reason, not merely to avoid insufficient workload. Your reason shows you are still being moved by the values that you despise. We want to cut the work production load on people. We want them to face the problem of leisure, not flee from it." "There's a heartwarming paradox here," Burnett explained. "Every excess eventually undermines itself. Everybody in the movement starts by